Akwaba, which just means welcome in West African Akan. Glad everybody is here. Welcome today. Hope you are maintaining your most highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual health today on this Sunday afternoon, where we are, Sunday afternoon. And thank you so much for joining us for this critical topic of our Ancestors' Voices, the 9/12/21 edition, remembering the Libyan Jamahiriya and imperialism's sabotage against it. Such an appropriate topic for this Sunday when all across this country, people are talking about 9/11. You know, it's amazing how people have all these things to say about September 11, 2001, and nothing to say about all the 9/11s this backward decadent government creates on a regular basis around the world. Nothing at all to say about that. That the money you pay in taxes funds that destruction, murder, and terror across the world. Nothing at all to say about that. But we're supposed to elevate one single incident, which is questionable at best, above all of those daily occurrences. Well, we're not going to do that here. We're going to talk about the Libyan Jamahiriya, which is one of those 9/11s that this government created, where they wiped out an entire country. They didn't just kill a few people, they wiped out an entire society in 2011. And so that's what we're going to talk about, the accomplishments of the Libyan Jamahiriya and why they wiped them out, why Obama's administration did that, because that's who was behind the destruction of the Libyan Jamahiriya. Barack Obama, the great Negro president of the 21st century. For those of you that actually believe that that represented some form of progress, we have said it a million times before, and we will say it again. Anybody that upholds capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, fascism, and homophobia can become president of these United Snakes of America. Doesn't matter who they are. They can be a one-eyed alien who is transgender from Mars. If they uphold all of those backward principles, they can be a representative of this backward society. So we're glad that you're here to join us. We, of course, give thanks to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, whose land we tread on here. And we give equal thanks to our African ancestors, who are the only reason why we are still here today and willing to make our humble contribution to move humanity forward. And so we appreciate you joining us, and we start, as we always do, by just making brief introductions for those that may not know, and to make sure that the police that are listening at least know how to spell our names correctly. I'm a Jamu, longtime organizer in the All African People's Revolutionary Party all over the world. And as long as I will be on this earth, in this being, I'll continue to do that work. And joining me, as is the case every week, is my amazing only child, Shakura, who is also an organizer in the AAPRP and AAWRU, All African Women's Revolutionary Union, and is also finishing up her studies and doing that work to contribute to our struggle for liberation. So as always, as I say every week, just honored to share this space with her and all the spaces that she and I share, a lot of spaces, and enjoy each and every one of them. And getting back to the All African People's Revolutionary Party, our objective and our work is centered around the objective of Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, which we define as the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism, or one unified socialist Africa. We believe that this is the objective which will liberate African people, 2 billion of us living in 120 countries worldwide, speaking English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Creole, all of these colonial languages that have been imposed upon us. We are one people, one culture, one history. And we believe that until Africa is free, no African anywhere on earth will be free. And our strategy to achieve Pan-Africanism is outlined in the book you see on the right side of your screen at the top, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare by Kwame Nkrumah. who is the founder of the APRP. And in that book, he calls for the unification and coordination of work for all revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground in Africa, who agree with the objective of one unified socialist Africa. You see some of the logos of some of those parties that we have active relationships with that we're building. If you participate in any of our international events like African Liberation Day or Pan-African Women's Day, you see all of these organizations participating with us. The Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, PAC. Azania is what the colonists call South Africa. That's the name the Germans gave it. We have our own name. We have our own culture. Azania is Zulu. It means land of the black faces. That's our name for Azania. And that is a liberation Pan-African organization there, along with the logo underneath it is ZAPO, the Azanian People's Organization. We are one with those entities. The PAIGC, the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, one. The Democratic Party of Guinea, separate country, one. The Amilcar Cabral Ideological School in Nigeria, one. The Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists, one. Some of the organizations not shown, the Pan-African Union of Sierra Leone, one. Kenyan Revolutionary League, one. It goes on and on. We are going to build revolutionary Pan-Africanism, you all. Doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. We don't care if you believe it or not. We're telling you right now, it's going to happen. It's in the process of happening as we speak. And we are united. We have chapters all over the world. You are not going to see that on CNN and CIA, obviously. The enemy is never going to show you the people that are fighting for their destruction, but the work is happening, and we build with other movements, non-African movements who are fighting for justice and liberation like we do. So now we talk about the Libyan Jamahiriya, remembering the Libyan Jamahiriya, and US sabotage against it. And to get us started today, I will gladly and humbly turn it over to Shakur.
Thank you so much, Daddy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Greetings, everyone. We hope that you are finding a way to be in your highest spirit, well, safe, healthy, happy, all of those good things. And we do hope that you have already decided to join some organization that is working for justice and building community defenses so that the organized masses of people can take back whatever oppressions they are experiencing. The reason we tie in what was happening and going on in Africa, and more specifically in Libya, is because we're trying to help you all understand that what's happening to some Africans in some part of the world is unfortunately happening to other Africans in other parts of the world. And when we read Malcolm Speaks in my work study circle recently, I loved how I could hear the evolution in his speeches as he was starting to understand that you can't just look at the experiences that Africans are dealing with in Harlem. You can't just look at the experiences that Africans are dealing with in Mississippi. You have to understand that those same situations are happening in the Congo. Those same situations are happening in Canada. Those same situations are happening in other parts of Africa, as well as other parts of the US. And so literally, Malcolm was drawing these comparisons in his speeches and starting to help our people in Harlem understand when he was giving these speeches in Harlem, but also when he went back home, that we really are not that different. And for us to see and to acknowledge and to question whether or not we are the same, and to not see that is a contradiction, and also perpetuating and promoting the colonists and what they intended to do when they kidnapped some of us, and some of us were able to run one direction and some of us were able to run another. So by us not understanding that Pan-Africanism really does unite us, because we are the same, whether we were born on one part of the soil or another part, we have to do the unlearned and unnecessary work in terms of helping ourselves understand that we need to unlearn what the colonists have worked so hard to teach us, which is that we do need to learn about what's happening in Africa. And more importantly, we cannot allow the oppressor to tell us and teach us about our own information, our own knowledge, our own wisdom comes from us researching ourselves. And I know for some of us, that's embarrassing. I know for some of us, it's causing us to be triggered. I know for some of us, it's hurtful and depressing. I understand that. This is what my dissertation is all about. So I do understand what the AAPRP or any organization working for justice that has some type of political background and education is asking you to do by considering to do the research. But here's the problem, my family: if you do not pursue doing research and learning about yourself, then you have no idea who you are. And I can't tell you how dangerous that is. Not knowing who you are is more dangerous than going outside without a mask in a pandemic, as far as I'm concerned, because that means you are vulnerable and you will literally soak up any information from anyone who is willing to give it to you, even if it's based on mistruth and lies. So that's why I say it's more dangerous than going out into a pandemic without a mask, because at least if you go out into a pandemic without a mask, you are consciously making a decision. But when you don't know who you are, family, the minute someone says anything that remotely sounds appropriate to you, you accept it and you start to idolize it and you start to build your ideology around it. And then we have this concept called social influence theory, where you're letting other people determine the actions and the behaviors that you are now exhibiting because you haven't done the research to learn yourself. So I can't wait to get into the slide and talk more about Libya, but I just really wanted to help us understand we're not, quote unquote, off topic by talking about Libya. We're still talking about the oppression of African people everywhere throughout this entire world. And we need to understand that the sooner the better. We understand that that's why we are asking for one unified socialist Africa, because a Pan-Africanist believes that Africans everywhere not only belong to the continent of Africa, but it is each of our responsibilities to make sure that Africa is free. We have benefited from Africa's exploitation. We have benefited from Africa's resources. Our mother needs our help. And so it's our responsibility to join an organization working for justice that has a political education background and also has this concept of community defenses, so that we're not supporting oppressive systems like police and other systems that were never designed to benefit the humanity, greater number of people, but was actually designed to benefit the dominant group. We need to release all of that and start our own systems where we can hold one another accountable. That's where this community defense concept comes from. So I'm off my soapbox for right now. I'm about to get back on it in just a second, but Libya has everything to do with what's happening in Memphis, and it has everything to do with what's happening in Sacramento, and it has everything to do with what's happening in the Congo, as well as other parts of the world. So I encourage us to continue to be open and to really, really, really think about, are we Pan-Africanists? And if so, what organization are we identifying with where we are doing political education research so that we can learn more about how to get Africa free? Now, on to the slide. So before September of 1969, Libya existed, like all of Africa in general, and North Africa in particular, as basically in oblivion to the Western world, besides the oil companies who had vested interests there. Several decades before, plentiful and quality oil reserves have been discovered throughout Libya, and to ensure that imperialism, primarily US, British, French, and Italian imperialism, had full and unfettered access to profit from that oil, like they do every resource in Africa, the neo-colonial government of King Idris was established. From December of 1951 through most of 1969, King Idris ruled Libya with an iron fist, brutally repressing any opposition to his rule. He didn't have king in his title for nothing, and permitting the imperialist countries to steal Libya's massive oil wealth. During that time, like all neo-colonial leaders, he was quite satisfied to shave off enough for himself, his family, and his minions, while the masses of people in Libya suffered. Chevron Oil, we know that name very well, was established as the primary oil drilling and producing company in Libya. And during the 1050s and during the 1050s year, about 40% of their annual revenues were generated from oil produced from Libya. So keep that in your pocket. The next time you decide to support an exploitive imperialist company like Chevron, and I'm not saying that Shell or Arco is any better. I'm just saying this is why political education is important, because we must understand where our money is going. As my dad just said, we also know from our taxes and our paychecks that we are funding wars that are causing Afghani women to have chemicals in their breasts when they're trying to give their babies breast milk. We are funding that. So we need to take responsibility for that, family, and try to figure out a way to not do that anymore. If we believe that people should have equity and quality of life, then we should organize against that. We can and we will, and we have done it before. There's so many countries that have reached independence now, and they are not suffering from neocolonialism, and that's because they have found a way to organize against colonists that are still trying to take over, and they have pushed them out. So it is possible, it has been done before, and we can do it. Next slide. On September 1st, 1969, a junior officer in the Libyan military named Muammar Gaddafi led a quick and effective military overthrow of King Idris. From that point forward, the Libyan Jamahiriya was established. The most common translation of the word Jamahiriya in English is, quote, state of the masses, end quote. One of the first acts of the Jamahiriya was to nationalize Chevron's control of Libya oil industry and to, as the new government proclaimed, use the national resources of the Libyan people to advance Libya and Africa. So we thank Comrade Muammar for understanding that Chevron was not in their right place to take over and to exploit that resource. And it's because of comrades and ancestors like Gaddafi that you and I are able to sit here and learn from the timeline that they have contributed to make the world a better place for people, not only in Libya, but as I said, their struggle and their sacrifice, what Gaddafi did is enabling you and I to be alive today to do the research so that we can learn about this person. So it would be an insult to their sacrifice and their struggles if we didn't seize this opportunity. But more importantly, it would be an insult to our children and the future to come after us. This information is there for a reason. We have to join organizations that are working for justice, and we need to do research from a political education standpoint so that we can learn who we are, who we have been, what we have done, and where we need to go, and use our ancestors to help lead the way. Our ancestors have literally left breadcrumbs, literally, I kid you not, because unfortunately the same oppressions that they were dealing with, we are now dealing with today. So they have already showed us how they dealt with it before. And these oppressive systems have come back and resurfaced, family. So we have to figure out a way to use the tools that were given before us and to allow our ancestors to support us, because they know what's going on and they are aware and clear of what the strategy is to address it and to eradicate it. So I encourage you all to join an organization working for justice, something that has community defense protocols and also political education. I cannot stress the importance of that. If you do not research who you are, then you will allow anyone to tell you who you are, which means you will literally believe anything anyone says about you and your people. And I can't stress how dangerous that is. Asante Sana.
Thank you ever so much, Shakura. And I just want to really highlight the point you just made before I get into the points on this slide. And that's that, you know, when we say Muammar Gaddafi, there is not a single person in the Western world that has not been propagandized to believe that that name represents evil. I could throw out a series of names: Muammar Gaddafi, Fidel Castro, Ernesto Che Guevara. I can throw out these names: Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung, and all of these people are automatically evil. But then when you follow up, and this is something, you know, I assume like most of you that are here, you're here even if you don't have a lot of knowledge about the subject. That's partially why you're here, of course. And so I would suggest if you want to examine what I'm saying right now a little deeper, just simply do an experiment. Talk to your family and friends and just ask them, you know, what can you tell me about Muammar Gaddafi from Libya? And what you'll find is that people are going to have all kinds of things to say. Very few people will say, well, I don't know anything. I've never researched it. I don't have any information. Very few people are going to say that. Some people have the sense to say that, but most of us don't. Instead, what you'll find is you'll get a lot of opinions from people. And those opinions will be based on, you know, what they saw in reports from television news, or what they read in news reports, or social media reports, or independent internet sources, or wherever they got it. It's something that was projected to them that they don't even know how to analyze from a critical basis, to look at and say, well, let me look and see if this makes sense compared to that, any of that. And they certainly, 99.9% of people haven't read any books about Libya. And so that's important, because if, you know, as Shakur was saying, if we're going to understand something and have an opinion about it, then we should at least respect ourselves enough to have the foundation to base that opinion on. So at the very least, the Green Book there, this is a book written by Muammar Gaddafi designed to explain to you the workings of the Libyan Jamahiriya. I mean, if you haven't read that, that's his words. Like, we should always start with primary sources, right? Because obviously if someone told someone else something about you, and that person came and said, well, you're evil because this person told me you're evil, no one listening to this would ever accept that. The first thing you would say is that, well, you didn't talk to me. You don't, that's not even true, what that person told you. So clearly primary sources, that's unquestionably the correct route that we all should be operating on. So you should start, if you're going to have any opinion on Gaddafi, just using him as an example, obviously you should start with what he had to say. And then if you want to contrast that with what CNN or CIA say about him, then you do that. We certainly do that. All the stuff you've read about Gaddafi, I assure you I've seen it too. But I didn't base my foundation on it from that. That's the difference. So we have to learn how to do that so we can study and understand, okay, this is what they're doing. Because nobody can tell me, you know, and I'm about to share some of this information, obviously, with you, but nobody can just come to me and just tell me any old thing about Libya or anywhere in Africa, because Africa is my home. I know this, and I will not let anybody disrespect my mother. So if you come to me talking about Africa, you damn sure better know what you're talking about. Otherwise, you will get shot down, as you should. And imagine if all of us, even just a higher percentage of us, had that type of capacity for justice, how much farther along we would be in the work that we want to see done. I mean, that's even if just 10% of us could confidently make the statement I just made, that would move us so much farther ahead than where we are now. And that's what we're trying to get to. So let's talk about just some aspects of the Libyan Jamahiriya, right? So as I said, the philosophies of the Jamahiriya are laid out in the Green Book. In the Green Book, they talk about how they've structured their society in Libya from 1969 until 2011, how they did not believe in political parties. Now, I don't, that's not a position I hold. Obviously, I belong to a political party. The All African People's Revolutionary Party is a political party. So that's not a position that we agree with, but we study the Green Book to understand what Comrade Gaddafi was talking about when, in their view, they saw the people's institutions in Libya as their political instrument to enact their political will. And they did not see the necessity for political parties because of that approach that they engaged in. And so the Green Book talks about that. It talks about how their society is organized around scientific socialist principles. and that they are anti-colonial organization that believes in using, you know, every instrument that they have to combat colonialism and build socialist socialist institutions throughout their country. So it's a fascinating read. If you haven't read it, I know most people haven't, then you should pick it up. It's readily available. I mean, you can buy it anywhere. So there's no excuse for us to know the name Muammar Gaddafi and have never read the Green Book. Like, that's, what logical excuse for that is there, especially when, you know, you're dealing with a system that's going to tell you all kind of things, you know, all kind of opinions about it. Where are those coming from? They're coming from people that don't have your best interests at heart. So that's the first thing. Understanding the Green Book is the guiding philosophical foundation for the Libyan Jamahiriya and the revolution that they engaged in for those 42 years. The government reaffirmed itself, because a lot of people will tell you, and Shakur mentioned, that Gaddafi came to power, they had a military coup d'etat. And typically, military coup d'etats are not going to be positive instruments for a transition to democratic governance in a society, because the military never is going to represent democratic principles. The military itself, in terms of how militaries operate, are organizations that are dominated by control and giving orders. So clearly the military, no military anywhere is based in a foundation of democratic thought. So just from that understanding, you would not typically say that the military is an instrument that can bring about democratic rule. And history has borne that out, because you can't even point to many instances where that's happened, where democracy has evolved from a military coup d'etat. But Libya presents us with a different model, because even though the military did engage in the overthrow of King Idris through a military coup d'etat, they immediately organized national referendums. And if you don't know, referendums are national votes. And nobody, pretty much nobody in the Western capitalist societies, the United States, knows what a referendum is, because nothing like that exists here. There's nothing here that are just mass votes. No, well, you have to register to qualify. None of that nonsense. You have, well, we're closing polling stations so you can't vote. None of that nonsense. Everybody votes. Everybody has a right to vote on the questions. And what the Jamahiriya did is they had referendums around, do you want the Jamahiriya to continue as the governing body in this country? And people overwhelmingly, they had multiple referendums, you all, and people overwhelmingly, over 90%, voted in favor of the Libyan Jamahiriya continuing. So the point of that is, although, yes, they started with a military coup d'etat, you cannot effectively argue that they stayed there. And there, again, there are not that many examples of that in history, especially in Africa. There are not. There are only a couple, really. The Libyan Jamahiriya, and I would argue Burkina Faso with Thomas Sankara is another example of where that took place, where a military coup is where the government came to power, but they immediately implemented democratic measures, democratic organizational mechanisms, referendums, and from there, those institutions served as the vehicle for decision-making in the country. So what the Green Book says, and if you study how Libya operated, Muammar Gaddafi really held no official position in Libya. Now, that's not saying that he didn't obviously have influence over what happened there, but he held no elected position in the country. So you watch imperialist military media, rather, and they tell you, oh, Muammar Gaddafi, the president of Libya, the ruler of Libya, he had no official title. That's them putting that on him. Just like in socialist Cuba, they told Fidel Castro was the ruler, the dictator. Fidel Castro had one vote in the Cuban National Assembly. The garbage worker who picked up garbage had one vote when that person was elected to the Cuban National Assembly. The garbage worker's one vote had no more authority than Fidel Castro's one vote, or Raul Castro's one vote, or Che Guevara's vote when he was living. had no more authority than that. And if you study the history, you know this because you know there are many initiatives that the Castro brothers initiated in the National Assembly over the years that were voted down by the masses of Cuban people in their National Assembly. The people in the Communist Party of Cuba who participated in their National Assembly, when I say National Assembly, that would be the same as in this bourgeois society, the Senate and the House of Representatives, okay, in Washington, D.C. So the National Assembly there, the Communist Party members had no more of a vote in there than the Democratic and Republican Party members supposedly have a vote in the Senate and Assembly here. So you can't, there's no argument that Fidel Castro was a dictator. There's no argument that Muammar Gaddafi was a dictator, because the definition of a dictator is someone who owns, controls, steals the resources of a country and uses them for their own wealth. Gaddafi lived in a tent, you all, in Tripoli. He did not have a huge mansion that he lived in. He did not have billions of dollars in Swiss bank accounts or Cayman Islands offshore banking. He didn't have any of that. Even his largest enemies, even US imperialism, you've never heard them talking about all these riches that they found after they murdered Gaddafi, because that didn't happen. You never heard them say that about Fidel. Even they didn't say that about Fidel Castro. But they keep saying that, they keep wanting to plant that vision in your mind by telling you he was a dictator. And so when we respond to that by saying to you is that, what is the benefit of being a dictator if you're not going to benefit personally? There's no evidence of that whatsoever. So just something to keep in mind. And as we said, the oil wealth, the way that it was used and distributed throughout Libya is the Libyan Jamahiriya. When families started, when people got married or had children or decided to start a family, the government gave you a financial stipend to start your family off on. Not no $1,400 one-time stimulus check in the middle of a damn pandemic. They gave you money to start your family, understanding it's going to take you a while to get established. They gave you the equivalent of thousands of US dollars to start your family. That's what they used the oil wealth for. They used it for free education, education completely free in Libya. Women and marginalized genders in Libya were able to get full education under the Libyan Jamahiriya, something that had never happened before and has not happened in Libya since 2011. Free healthcare, where your healthcare was free. Libya almost was able to accomplish the competency of healthcare that socialist Cuba, which provides the best healthcare on earth, that they were able to accomplish. Libya was very, very close to achieving that level of healthcare. People all over Africa would try to find a way to get to Libya to get the treatment that they most definitely needed. So that's how they used the wealth. That's what socialism is, you all. I know that CIA and CNN and Fox and all those raggedy thugs tell you all kind of stuff about what socialism is. But again, as Shakur said, this is the reason political education is so critical. Because if you don't have a process where you're learning what socialism is yourself, there's no way you can convince us that you're not convinced by what other people are telling you it is. I don't care what you think you are doing. There's no way you're not going to be influenced by that. So this is what, if you want to know what it is, that's what I just described to you that they were doing under the Libyan Jamahiriya. That's what socialism is. Using the resources of a society to ensure that people have the capacity to reach their full potential. Cut out all this absolutely ridiculous nonsense that socialism is equality, where nobody has to work and everybody gets the same thing. That's capitalism defining socialism for you. And I know some of you and people you know, that's what you think socialism is. That's not what socialism is. Socialism is about eliminating the obstacles, because a capitalist society has so many obstacles. If you're African, we're going to prevent you from doing that. If you're indigenous, if you're a woman, if you're marginalized gender, we're going to have all this in place. We're going to have these good old boy networks. You're never going to get the opportunity to reach your potential. What socialism does is simply removes that and says that the more you work, you can achieve whatever, and you can be whatever you want to be. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, you can be a garbage picker-upper, but you will be respected for whatever contribution you make. And the difference is, it won't be that you didn't become a doctor because you couldn't afford medical school, because it's free. That's what socialism is, you all. And so, yeah, there's doctors in Cuba that make more than people that bust tables, but the people that bust tables, they can be doctors if they wanted to at any time. They can decide, I want to go to medical school and become a doctor, and they can get the subsidies, so they don't have to worry about how they're going to eat while they get their education, and they can become doctors. That's what socialism is, you all. That's it. That's all it is. Anybody in their right mind see a problem with that? Any logical person can never see a problem with that. That's all it is. That's what they were doing in the Libyan Jamahiriya. The oppression of women and marginalized genders was challenged, and women were given the opportunity to do things that they could not do anywhere else in the Arab world and in North Africa, like be able to get divorces, to not be forced to marry, to go to school and get education, become doctors and lawyers and whatever they wanted to be, that they had the willingness to work to be able to drive, to be single and have to do all those things. Women were, and marginalized genders were permitted to have the opportunity to reach their full potential in society. Not permitted, but able to reach their full potential in society. And then we need to talk about the Bedouin Desert in Libya, very critical region in Libya, for several reasons. One, because that was the region where Muammar Gaddafi was born and raised. For two, because that Bedouin Desert region is the place in Libya that is primarily African folks, or what you call Black folks. Okay, so what that meant is that the African people from the Bedouin region, the non-Arab Libyans, had overwhelming support from Muammar Gaddafi, not just because he came from the same place they came from, but because the policies of the Libyan Jamahiriya, like any revolution's policies, are designed to uplift the people on the bottom. And because of the exploitation of Africa for capitalist development and imperialist dominance of the world, African people, wherever we live on earth, are at the bottom of the society. That the two go hand in hand. You cannot exploit our mother to raise yourself up without us being on the bottom. That's just what happens. We don't understand that. We think we're just on the bottom in America because there's something wrong with us individually, or just because European people here in America, they don't like us. They don't like Blackness, you know, all this nonsense. We're where we are here because Africa is exploited. That's what it's all about, you all. That's the basis of all of this. So to challenge that, that's why the Africans in the Bedouin Desert so supported Muammar Gaddafi. And that's important because people today, they'll talk about, well, there's slavery in Libya under these reactionaries that Obama's administration placed in power in Libya when they murdered Gaddafi and overthrew the Jamahiriya. Well, these people are going after the Africans in the Bedouin Desert because they were the ones who most consistently supported the Libyan Jamahiriya. That's what it's all about. It's not just because their skin is Black. I mean, we do better, understand what's happening in the world. Well, they're putting them in slavery because they're Black. Lord have mercy, man. You give me such a headache with that nonsense. This is about a political and economic struggle. And do all of us a favor and let's get informed about it so we can do something about it. So don't forget that, the Bedouin Desert, very critical region in Libya. So some great accomplishments of the Jamahiriya is that they understood that they were not just in a vacuum in Libya. They knew they had to ally themselves with other forces struggling for justice around the world. So they engaged in principled support for the most radical Palestinian resistance elements. Back in the 1980s, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, all of those types of radical Palestinian formations. They were not, Libya was not a supporter of Al-Fatah, which was the segment of the Palestine Liberation Organization that was governed by Yasser Arafat. They did not see them as being radical enough. Today, the descendant of Al-Fatah are the people that govern in the Palestinian Authority, or the West Bank in Palestine. And then, of course, in Hamas, I'm sorry, in the Gaza, Hamas is a much more radical element of that. So the Jamahiriya supported the radical Palestinian elements long before it was fashionable to do so. They also supported the African liberation movements uncompromisingly in Africa throughout the 70s and 80s. The African National Congress in Azania, the Pan-Africanist Congress in Azania, the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau in Guinea-Bissau, the Libyan Jamahiriya, the Pan-African Union of Sierra Leone. The Jamahiriya supported these elements throughout Africa that were fighting for liberation in Africa. That's why when Nelson Mandela was freed from prison in 1990, the two of the first things he did were what? He went to Libya to thank Muammar Gaddafi. Then he went to Cuba to thank Fidel Castro, because those two countries were supporting the liberation of Africans in Azania, or what you call South Africa, when the US, the United States, was calling the African National Congress a terrorist organization, just like they were calling the Palestine Liberation Organization a terrorist organization. Look it up. Go back to the 80s and see that. Because now they want you to think they always supported the end of apartheid in Azania, South Africa. They never supported that. They only decided to take a different position when they had no other choice, when it was inevitable, when it was because of the pressure of the movement to eradicate apartheid in Azania, South Africa. But the Libyan Jamahiriya was always, always, always on the right side of history on that issue. And this is the reason why even today, you go to Africa and you mention Muammar Gaddafi, he's wildly popular in Africa. I would argue the most popular man in Africa over the last 40, 50 years. I would argue that, and would have strong evidence to support that because of what I'm talking to you about and some of the other things I'm going to demonstrate to you. So like I said, actively supporting African liberation, not only just in Africa, but throughout the African diaspora. And this term diaspora, there's a lot of confusion about it. Like people are talking about Africa and they say diaspora. Diaspora means people outside of Africa, African people outside of Africa. That's what that term means. Like everything, there's no foundation, so everything can mean anything these days. I'm sorry, I'm sticking with what I know it correctly means. It means Africans outside of Africa. That's what the term diaspora means. So Gaddafi was supportive of struggles for African liberation by people in Africa. I just gave you demonstrations of that, as well as people outside of Africa. If you know the history, you know what I'm talking about. In 1985, Muammar Gaddafi, via closed circuit television, spoke to the Nation of Islam's annual Savior's Day, February 1985, in Chicago, Illinois, United States. Minister Louis Farrakhan had Gaddafi beamed in because in 1973, Elijah Muhammad formed a relationship with Muammar Gaddafi, and Muammar Gaddafi loaned Elijah Muhammad $5 million to help build the Nation of Islam. And in 1984-85, Minister Farrakhan did the same thing. And so he had Gaddafi beamed into his Savior's Day. And it was during that presentation, you can see it on YouTube, Gaddafi told the Africans at the Nation of Islam Savior's Day in 1985, get out of the US military. We will give you arms to overthrow the US government. That's what they did. That's why this country labeled them a terrorist, because you can never, anybody that has the audacity to suggest that somebody should overthrow the US government is a terrorist. But yet the US government every day not only suggests that other governments should be overthrown, but provides the training and equipment for democratically elected governments to be overthrown, provides the training and equipment for Cuba's democratic society, their socialist society, be overthrown. Clearly, all the election observers from all over the world, even the ones from capitalist countries, report that the referendums in Cuba are clean and fair. Report that the elections in Venezuela are clean and fair, yet they try to overthrow those governments. Report that the elections in Bolivia are clean and fair, yet they try to overthrow those governments. But how dare somebody suggest that somebody overthrow this government? They're a terrorist and a terrible person. And they will even put it on TV. Y'all see it on TV and people still don't get it. There's that show that's on TV, what is it, Snowfall, that's talking about how they used crack proceeds from crack cocaine, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, right, to finance the illegal Contra army in Nicaragua to overthrow the Sandinista government in the 80s, 70s and 80s, right? That's what they did. There's a bunch of, I'm telling you, thugs, crooks, and criminals. That's what they do. So no question about Libyan Jamahiriya's consistency in supporting liberation movements all over the world. And that's what got them in trouble with imperialism. And so in 1988, they targeted the Jamahiriya for the Lockerbie incident. And the Lockerbie incident was that a plane was shot down. And they applied pressure on the international community to isolate Libya for this attack. Now, it's still not clear what happened. Some people say that Libya admitted to shooting down the plane. I don't know if they admitted to shooting it down or not. If they did, that was something they should not have done. And I know I've studied Libya enough to know that they were certainly not perfect. Nobody is. They certainly were not perfect. The role that they played in Liberia was a disastrous one. No question about that. The role that they played in Sierra Leone was not a productive one. But that does not, as we talked about in the event we did honoring Huey P. Newton a couple of weeks ago, we have to look at the totality of a people or a person or a movement. And what we say when we look at the Libyan Jamahiriya is that, yeah, they made errors, but overwhelmingly what they did was beneficial for the majority of people on earth. And so we have to use that as the primary basis from which we evaluate them. And so the Lockerbie incident was used. And again, the US is not anti-terrorism. They support terrorism against anybody they don't like. They've engaged in nothing but terrorist acts against the democratically elected government of Venezuela, the democratically elected government of Bolivia, the democratic government in Cuba. They operate terrorist acts against those societies every single day. So they're not against it. They just use this Lockerbie incident to isolate Libya and put Libya in a position where they could ensure that Libya was overthrown. So the reason why they destroyed Libya, apologies for the typo there, the reasons why they destroyed Libya were connected to the work Libya was doing. And they were, besides the things that we already mentioned, there were two very significant projects that Libya was involved in. One was Gaddafi working through the African Union, which was, before that, the Organization of African Unity, which was founded by Kwame Nkrumah, the founder, I told you, of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, founded the Organization of African Unity when he was president of Ghana before the CIA overthrew his government on February 24th, 1966. Gaddafi, and if you study Gaddafi, you study the Green Book and you do that, Gaddafi was clear that he was following Nkrumah's vision. He stated that multiple times. And so people that don't study history don't know that, but when he proposed to the African Union that Libya offer up an African currency for the entire African continent, this was based on the vision that he was influenced by Kwame Nkrumah from. And so Libya was trying to develop what they called the Libyan dinar, which was going to be the currency for all of Africa that was going to be backed by Libyan gold, because, you know, currency is backed by something that can substantiate it in the, you know, this is what keeps currency from losing its value, right? What it's backed on determines how strong its value is going to be. So this is what Libya was doing. And clearly imperialism knew that they had to destroy Gaddafi and the Jamahiriya after this, because if you understand world currency, the US dollar, the British pound, the France franc, the European Union currency, these are the dominant currencies on earth. They dictate the value of everything on earth. African currencies are useless. If you're in Senegal and the currency in Senegal is the CFA, and you can have as much CFA as you want in your pocket. When you get to the Senegalese border and you get ready to cross the Gambian River and go into Gambia, the currency in Gambia is the Dalasi. All of the Senegalese CFA you have is worthless in Gambia. All of the Gambian Dalasi you have is worthless when you cross back over that Gambian River and go back into Senegal. So what the Libyan diner would have done was eliminate that and make it so that now, for the first time in history, Africa had a currency that could hold its own on international markets with the US dollar, the British pound, the French franc, the European Union currency. And this is what capitalism and international imperialism could not fathom happening, because this would have changed the game. They would no longer have been in control. They would no longer have been able to exploit Africa the way they do. And if they can't exploit Africa, and you begin to see Africa having currency and power on the world now for the first time, you're going to say, I'm proud to be an African, and you're going to want to fight for African liberation. And now they can't trick you with this, well, no, you're African American, even though we deny everything about the benefits of America to you. That's no longer going to work. And then once that happens, and then the indigenous people are strengthened, they can get their land back, and then white people wake up out of this stupid stupor you've been in for 500 years and realize this nation is not for you either. Their days are numbered, you all. They know that. That's why they can't let any of this happen. I don't care. You can put as anybody black as you want in there. They're representing international imperialism. They can never permit this to happen. I don't care what they look like. He can look as good as he wants. He can sing Al Green. If we stay together, he can do all that. He's still representing imperialism. Y'all don't understand that. People are so confused because he looks like you and he sings Al Green. That's all it takes to confuse you. You don't have the capacity to see what these people are actually doing behind the Al Green song. That's what we got to get to, you all. That's what we need. Obama is not here to advance the masses of African people. He did nothing to do that. You can't point to one thing that he did that advanced the masses of African people. We can point to countless things that he did to set us back. Libya, the destruction of Libya is one of those things. Another thing was the proliferation of US military bases all throughout Africa, mass incarceration, we can go on and on. But y'all ain't trying to hear me though anyway. You love you some Obama. Another thing the Libyan Jamahiriya did was create the International Mathaba, which is a collection of international revolutionary organizations. And it was hosted by Libya. Now, a lot of people are confused. A lot of people look at the Communist International, which was governed by the Soviet Union. Well, Pan-Africanists, we've never been a part of the Communist International. That's Europeans who are Marxist-Leninists. Nothing against that, that's great, but that's their movement. We have a different, separate movement. And so the Mathaba provided an instrument for us to engage in international solidarity. And we did that. And the Mathaba awarded money to the Palestinian struggle. They gave awards to the American Indian movement. That's what they were there to do. We know this because Kwame Ture, a Central Committee member for the All African People's Revolutionary Party and the Democratic Party of Guinea, was on the governing committee for the Libyan Mathaba. So we know this, we know the history. You can look at it and search it. That was another reason that made the Jamahiriya dangerous. And then finally, the picture you see there, the Great Man-Made River, where the Libyan Jamahiriya built a dam collection, the most extravagant dam collection in construction history, that provided potable water for all of the people in the areas in and around the Sahara Desert. This was a phenomenal development. It provided healthy drinking water to all these folks, millions of people. Imperialism never has done anything like that in Africa or anywhere else in the world. Libya did it. And all of that is destroyed now, y'all. When your Obama bombed the hell out of Libya in 2011, they intentionally destroyed the man-made river. They destroyed the people's ability in and around the Sahara Desert to have drinking water. And this is what people see around the world. The people here don't see it because they're not looking. But that's the thing, those are the things that Libya gave. This is why people respect the Jamahiriya the way they did. And they certainly, without question, raised up the Black population of Libya. That's why the people that Obama put in power are targeting the Black populations there because of their support for the Jamahiriya. But the Jamahiriya is not dead. The Jamahiriya is organized. That's why they're engaging in the repression against them that they are. And because of the popularity of Jamahiriya, we will say that we anticipate that you have not seen the last of the Libyan Jamahiriya. So imperialism assassination of Gaddafi in 2011 and the destruction of the Jamahiriya at that time, just like Afghanistan, created intense chaos that even Obama, even he, when he left office, he had to acknowledge, and they, you know, they don't ever admit when they did anything wrong, but he had to acknowledge that, man, that was really something, because he couldn't even justify it. Couldn't even justify what they did in Libya. This is your guy, your Negro president. He couldn't even justify. He had to acknowledge, like, yeah, oh, it was a mistake. You know, could Osama bin Laden, and I'm not saying he's guilty of 9/11 because I don't believe that he was, but just for the sake of argument, if Osama bin Laden had come before you and said, yeah, you know, I did 9/11, it was a mistake, that would never be acceptable to people here. And you're only talking about 2,000 people that lost their lives. That would never be acceptable to people here. So don't give me this, oh, Obama, he apologized. I don't give a damn about that. He destroyed a bright light in Africa that we're going to have to do a tremendous amount of work to build up, where a whole lot more than 2,000 people were killed. I guarantee you that. That's why we say your tax dollars paid for multiple 9/11s and nobody cares. And that's disgraceful. But as Huey P. Newton said, and we say it before and we'll continue to say it, the man's technology will never equal the spirit of the people. The Libyan Jamahiriya is not dead. It will rise again, just as Africa will be free, united, and socialist. So we want to invite you back next week to join us. What we're going to be doing next week, you all, is we're going to have 8 consecutive weeks of breaking down my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. We're going to break down 1 chapter each week. So we invite you next Sunday, the 19th, 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. Tell a friend and come here when we're going to do A Guide for Organizing Defense. Chapter 1, the definition, objective of revolutionary community defense work. We're going to break down what we mean by that. So you're not going to want to miss that. We're going to take you through the whole book because we understand, like, people struggle with reading. So we got to work with people and break down these concepts. So we're here. This is a working workshop, and we're here to do that next week. And you hope we join us and tell people so that we can do that. We invite you to come to aaprp-intl.org, where you can join the AAPRP and get information. abetterworld.me. Donate while you're there. All of these videos are housed there. So if you want to come back in a couple of weeks and see this one or any of the other 80-something episodes that we have there, they're all there and you can watch them. So tell people and do that if they miss. Again, I'm an editor for the Hood Communist Collective. We have events on Telegram. You can download the Telegram app free on your smartphone every other Thursday, 4:30 Pacific time, 7:30 Eastern time. We had a great one this past Thursday on celebrity culture. So these are discussions where you can participate. So we invite you to participate there. We have a number of these podcasts here. The Pontula one on Mondays, Revolutionary African Women, the last Saturday, the Forward Ever broadcast on Spotify. our comrades in New Mexico, the APRP New Mexico broadcast Thursdays at noon Mountain Time. Obviously, as I mentioned, we're doing this one every Sunday. The All African People's Revolutionary Party is committed to this political education, you all. It's what we need. It's what we need more than anything else. Continue to buy the book. People are still buying it. 6 months later, it's selling regularly. This is great. We're using the proceeds to do the work that we're using. I'm involved in political and community defense projects based on my book that I'm helping build. Had a great meeting this morning with some wonderful people in the southern part of the US. I'm gonna build a project down there with them, working with some folks in Philadelphia, working with folks here in Sacramento. We're doing work, y'all, based on the concepts here in this book. And whatever money I get from the book, when you buy it, using it to finance this work. All right. So we thank you for joining us today. We want to wish you a great rest of your Sunday afternoon. We hope you benefited from what we had to offer today. If you didn't, it's not our fault because we gave it to you. It's right there for you. And you can go back and watch it again. So check out what we're doing next week. Check all of these things out. Join an organization working for justice. Forward ever, backwards never. Forward to one unified socialist Africa. Patriarchy is evil. Homophobia is evil. White supremacy is evil. Capitalism, y'all already know, it's got to go. We hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday.